small. Okay, so text files are also called sequential access files. I mean, we say text files, it really mean just text. There's nothing in there, nothing than just ASCII characters and maybe the carriage return characters you might see in there. It's invisible sometimes, but you can also turn it on in certain programs like the certain program you can actually view the special characters, but basically they're just plain text files. Okay, sequential access because when you access a file, pretty much any program, either Visual Basic or Java or whatever the language you use, you usually read from top to bottom, right? So you actually reading that file line by line sequentially. That's why it's called sequential access files. Okay, and so we have text files. You also have binary files, and they're a little bit different. Binary is a different format because what it does is it actually converts all your text files, also ASCII characters, into in the binary code, and so that way it's kind of like all your texts are all scrambled into some strange characters, so you can't read it. I mean, it's not human readable, so a machine can read it, which is fine, but you can't read it, and that way it's a little bit secure. Not only that, when you write a binary file, only that program can read it. Whoever generate that binary file can only read a file. So for example, Microsoft Word is a binary file. Okay, so when you save a Word document in Word, you save it as a Word doc or in the .doc or .docx. Usually only Microsoft Word can read that file back. You cannot open that in in other applications. Okay, so that is also one thing. But a text file is portable. It's portable. You can read it with any system. You can read it from on the internet with your browser. Read it with Microsoft Word, or any program can read those. Okay, so here is an example of a sequential text file. Right, very simple. You see that in Notepad all the time. And again, they're just plain text. This is another one. It's all text. This is a special file. It's called a CSV file. You probably heard the term many times. If you haven't, this is what it is and what it looks like. It's a comma separated. Initially they used comma, but you can actually use different delimiter to separate those fields. So if you look at this file, you see that it's a long string of text, and each line has a lot of fields in there. So each line is called a record. If you think about in terms of a database table, right? A line is a record of data which is related to that particular person or thing or object, whatever that is. So in this case, like the first one here, it's related to Zoltan Halme, and I think this is like something about the meal. I'm not sure what that is about. Sports? Yeah, sports, right? Swimmers. So you have a record of information here is stored in a text file, and with this file, because in this format you have, if you count these with the comma separated, you will have, or in this case it will be, it's not really comma, it's separated by a semicolon. Okay, even though they call it comma separated value, it's really you can use any special characters. So in this case, you separate each field by a semicolon. Okay, so the first field here is the metal list ID, and that is the name of that field, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This field is the ID for that, and then the second is the edition. So this would be the 1900 edition, whatever that is, maybe. And then we have the athlete name. So it will be Halme and Zoltan and so on. So the next comma separated is the NOC and gender and so on. So they will match those total fields if you count them. If you match them up, you have a actually it's a table of data, right? But now you put into a text file, so you read it back to Visual Basic or other programs. You can look for the semicolon, which is the separated value, and then you break that off and then put it into a database, or put into or array or anything, right? And this is another text file. You see that all the time. It's a web document. It's an HTML file. Actually, it's an XML, HTML, Again, there's no special characters in there. It's a bunch of text only. That's what web documents look like, right? It's just plain text. And then we have these are the different methods of how you can read text files into Visual Basic. Okay, so the quickest way is to read the entire file one time. Okay, so you probably seen this in the book. I think the author introduced this a little bit in chapter 7 as well. But basically, this is the syntax to read a text file from top to bottom. One read captures everything, and then that's done. Okay, so it's just a single line of code. Really, you just do that, right? So you want to read this file called mytext.txt. Read all lines, right? It's pretty straightforward. Read it into the array of str of strings. So if you remember array, when we do it this way, we don't specify the length or the size of the array in there because it's determined by the whatever is inside in the content of the text file. So if the text file has only one record, then there's only just one data in there, and so on. Okay, so when you read this file, it's gonna break it. In this case, it's gonna break it at the end of the line. So you don't specify what character to break in this case. So we just look at for the carriage return. If I were to read this file like this one here, then it will read the entire line here. When you reach the end of the line, you have a carriage return that will cause a line feed, and then when you reach that carriage return, then it will record this whole line into the first element of the array, and then it will read the next line, and so on. So it reads the entire line, entire file, and it will generate, in this case, you have about 27 plus the first line of text, that's 28, right? 28 items, which is you have an index of 27, okay? So when you generate the file, then you have something in there in your array. And if you want to access each of those individual records, a field, then you have to do another step, right? You have to split each of those fields, each of those index into their own separate field by using like a semicolon as the delimiter. Okay. This one here, I show you two examples here. This one you're reading the, if you notice that the location of the text file has no directory or has no, we call it like a complete qualification or complete link to what the file is. If you're reading this in Visual Basic, then there is a default location that is stored inside the bin, and then the bin directory. I'll show you what that is. Okay, by default. If you're reading a text file from somewhere else outside of that program, and then you can specify the direct location of that file where it is stored. So you can say it's in my C drive, it's inside a folder called text files, and that's the name of text file. So you can have the complete link to that file to read that as well. You can also, I'm pretty sure, read it from the internet too. If you have access to the internet, you can read that as well. Put a full URL here. If it's like on http :/, whatever it is, you put that here. Okay, so here's an example of what the text file is located. So if you don't specify the location, if you just do like option 1 here, just put the name of your text files inside the curly, set the paren here, then this text file has to reside inside this folder called debug, which is inside the bin folder, which is inside your project folder. Okay, so you have to drag that file in there. You can create a text file within your program and drag it in there, or you can write the text file outside of the program and just again drag it from your folder or whatever that is into that program right there, into that folder, debug folder, in order to access it. Okay, so for example, I save it here in the C drive, and I have a folder called text files, and inside the text file is my actual text files. So if you want to use this way, that's option 2. You can just grab the URL here, grab that, and then put it inside here. If it's an external file outside of your Visual Basic project. Okay, so 2 options. And then when you read all line, for example, this file has, about 5 records. We call records because each line is a record. Okay. And once you do that, then you read, if you read this way, you'll see that the first subscript here, subscript 0 of the string, will store each line of text. Okay, so it will look like that inside your array. And then, okay, so this is for reading all lines at once. Again, you just read it one time, and you don't check, you don't care whether what's inside that file. You just read everything until the end of the file, and then you're done with that. Okay? So if the file happen to have no data, then you don't have any data. If it has 100 million data, then it's going to load all 100 million data at one time. And if you have that many files, then usually it might cause a lag, and your system might delay for a while, depending on how fast your system is to load those text files. So that could be good or bad. Okay, the bad thing is you don't know what's inside. If you are concerned about what the contents are, then you want to read each line by line, or even character by character, just to make sure that it's so that what you're reading is legal or valid data before you continue reading on the file. To do that, you will have to call a different method, and you will use what's called a stream reader to read data from the file, but now you're reading, it's like line by line or character by character. Okay, things line by line. And then you can also have the same, the other way around. It's called the stream writer. You can also write to a file. You can write, line by line, or you can also write it all at once. What it's not shown here is it's just a reading file. So you read all lines from this text file. I'll also show you how to write to your text file as well using the write all lines. So I'll just write all, right? Write everything at one time too. So to read a file, and if you want to read each line by line, then you have to use the stream reader. And to do that, you have to follow a few steps. Okay, the first thing is you want to open the file first, right before you access it. You open the file. When you check if the file exists, actually, it's the first thing you should do usually. If the file is there, then you open it. Once you open it, then you can now access the file. You can read the stream of data line by line into an array or to a string. And then you can have a pointer that read each line by line until the end of the file is reached. And then once that is reached, then you are done. So you will be doing a loop, a while loop, right? So while there's still data to read, you keep reading until the next line is the end of the line. Okay, so you have a few steps to do that. And you will use what's called a exist method to make sure the file exists. If it doesn't exist, then you don't need to read the file, otherwise you just have an error. Okay, read line is another function you can use to read the entire line, one line at a time. Okay, if you don't use a loop, then it does not continue on reading. It will just read the first line, it stops there. Okay, so if you want to read until the end of the file, you want to use a peek method. Okay, the peek will actually look into the next line if there's a line to read or not. If there's another line of text to read, then go ahead and read the next line, otherwise you're done, right? So you have those options there. So here's an example of that. So first, you would have to declare a stream reader. Okay. So in this case, if you look at this, it's just how you would declare a variable name. Right? It's called an in file, or call it in file. You should call it in or out, doesn't matter. And the data type in this case would be is IO. IO stands for input output. Dot file. Okay, so the dot file means this is a class, and a class is, in terms of object-oriented programming, is another entity that allows you to, do certain things. In this case, it would be reading and writing files, which is a child class of the IO. Okay, IO is like the parent, or called the super class, and then under that you have a file class, and then under that you have another class called stream reader class. Okay, So in object-oriented programming, when you write a class, you can use that class because it's like a template, a blueprint of an object. You can use that as a data type. Okay, so usually we see things like dim, num as integer, right? A string as a string, and so on. So now you have like infile as the string reader. Okay, and once you have that created, then you can now open the text file by issuing the file.openText. So the openText, string reader are both methods, right? Sub methods inside the class file. And you open text, and then in here you just put the text name. This is very similar to if you look at the other one we had, right? Read all lines, you put the text file name in here. But now instead of dot read all lines, you're going to open the text file first. Once you open it, then you can start reading the line. Okay, so you read the first line. And then, so if I just do this, all I'm doing is I open the file, I read the first line, that's it. So string var will now contain the first line of text. And then if it has more text, then it doesn't know where to go. It just stops there. So to read more text, you have to issue the a loop to do until the end of that file is completed. So here's an example of how you can read a file until you reach the end of that file. And you will use a loop to do that. You can use the do until or the do while, or just the while is completely fine. And you want to check that the end file dot peak, right, that method is equal to -1. So -1 means that's the end of the file. There's no more text to read. Okay? If it's not a -1, then that means there's still text to read, and then therefore you read the next line. You keep reading those lines of text until you read a -1, which is a special key that would terminate the loop there. Okay. So here is an example of, I think we just saw that one. Okay, so we'll do some examples of the reading one file at a time and reading each line. This part here is the writing. So you can read files. Of course, you can also write files. So the read all lines and write all lines, they work the same way. You can go in either direction, right? You read all lines at once. You can also write everything to the file at once. So for example, you have an array of data, and then you want to write the content in the array to a file name. Then you will use the write all lines. The write all lines takes two parameters. The first one is the name of the file. Okay, if this file name doesn't exist, then it will create it for you automatically. Okay, if it does exist, then it will overwrite everything in that file and will just rewrite everything. You will lose all the data. So you have to be really careful with the with this write all lines here. So usually, again, you want to check if the file is already there. If it exists, then you want to say to the user, there's a file called, file name already. Do you want to overwrite it? If you say yes, then go ahead. If no, then you should give it a different name, right? So that's a caution right there. But to write files, this is all you do. Provide the file name and then the array of strings. Okay. So you can do, like, again, if you put just the file name here, it's going to be stored inside that bin folder. If you put the whole complete URL directory, then it will go into that location, whatever that file is being saved into. Okay. So you write all the arrays, all the strings, or all the content in that array all at once. So it does open the file, it writes the data, and then it closes the file off for you automatically. The read is the same thing. You open the text file, you read everything, then it closes the text file. It does it all at once within these write all lines and read all lines. Okay, so notice also that in the read file, when you read each line by line, once you're done with reading the file, usually you put you close the file name, right, so that you don't leave it open and just because it's just good practice for reading. When you write it, it's very quite different. So when you write it, so when you write each file, each line by line, you'll use a string writer as similar to the string reader, right? And then let's see if we have an example here. Don't have it. Okay. Well, a string writer would do kind of similar to what you seen earlier in the file, except this one you're writing line by line instead of the whole file at once. So you have a string writer object created here, same as you did before with the string reader. So we just call it out file if you want. And once that has been created, then you can go ahead and then issue the file dot create text. Okay, so in this case you don't have to open it; it's already open when you create that the create text here. It's going to look for a text file called memo in this example here, and if it doesn't exist, then it will create one for you. If it does exist, and it will overwrite it. Same thing. Okay, so once that file has been created and then open, you can now write text to your file. You have several options. One is you just keep writing to the so you have, once you have the file open, you can do one of these here. You can write line by line, or you can also append to the end of the file. So if the file exists, then you can use the append method. That way it will look automatically to the end of the file. It will just append new data to the file. It will preserve what's already in there. Okay, so that's a important option there. So here the create text method will create a new file, and then if it's an empty file, it will just dump everything in there. You lose everything. The append option will keep whatever you have in the file, and it just append the data to the existing file. So you have two options here: either create to overwrite it, or to append if this file is already existed. Okay. And then once you have that file open and ready to write, you can use the write method or the write line method here. Okay, the write method is like you're writing something without a carriage return. So it's like you're typing a letter or something and you haven't hit the return key yet, right? So if you keep issuing the write command, then you have a string of a string of text appended to the file. And if you don't ever hit a carriage return, or if you don't do a write line, your entire file, however long it is, can really contain just this long string of text, which is a single sentence. Okay, that may or may not be a good idea. And if you want to write multiple lines, then you want to use the write line method here, so that every time you write something to the file, it will issue the carriage return, and then it will go and then place the pointer to the next line to continue writing the data. Okay, so here's an example. If you were to write just out file.write hello, and then inside the file you'll see that the word hello is written there, and this pipe symbol here, it just means where your cursor is currently at inside the file. It stays right there. And if you write another word, let's just say out file.write world, then you will see that right next to this word hello, you'll see the word world right appended right to that the same file, same line. Okay, but if you use a write line, then you see that it terminates right after the O here, and then it brings the cursor right to the next line, ready to write the next line. Okay, so that's the difference between the write and write line. This is also true not just for Visual Basic, but also in Java and other languages, PHP and so on. If you do write or write line, it will issue you that as well. Is that carriage return? And once you write the data, if you're using the open stream or the writer stream writer option, if you don't use the write all lines method, if you're using this method, then you have to make sure that you close the file. Okay, close the stream there. If you don't close it, then whatever you think has written to the file is not going to be written in there. So just a temporary process. It really just put all this data into the text file, and then if you forgot to close the file, it's like you have a balloon or a bucket of water or something, balloon water, and you don't seal it, right? And then once you close the application, everything just like reversed. So you lose all the data. I mean, it's not going to store inside the file. So it's just going to be empty file. So make sure you close it at the end once you are done with the writing process. So just issue the out file.close, and that should seal the file, and then the file will be stored. That's really important. And then there is form closing event. This one here, I don't think we discovered it yet. We had the form opening, right? When you open the form, you initialize your data. Okay. Now there's another method called form closing event, and you can close the form, right, by using the me close. Some of you already use this method, which is great. With this form closing event, that means that when you close the program, you can actually prompt the user to really make sure that they really want to close it or not. It's just the last attempt to warn the user, right? I'm pretty sure you've seen that before. When you close something, you forgot to save, in Windows or Microsoft Word will ask you to, hey, you forgot to save this file. Do you want to save it or not, right? So you give the option to ask the user. So that's the form closing event, and you can issue that inside here. It's just a subroutine similar to the handle start, but it just a me form closing, handles a me form closing, and then in there you can issue some commands in there. So if you were writing files, usually this is where you would save all your data to your text files or your database, and then you close the program. Okay. So this one you just write it, save everything from the array to the text files, and then you close the application. This option here, you just basically said you prompt a message to the user to ask them if they want to really exit or not, and you can read the response yes or no, and you can either choose to close the program, or if they say no, then you would just cancel that, and then it would do nothing. It would just stay there and then continue what it is doing. Okay, so that's another option. Okay, so that's just alignment, writing the records. Okay. All right, so let's just go ahead and then do some examples in here.